Who are the Rhodesians? The first were the pioneers who blazed a trail from Bechuanaland in 1890 following the dreams of the founder, Cecil John Rhodes. Rhodes had obtained concessions from Lobagula, chief of the Matabele, as the British South Africa Company to search for and mine gold and other metals, and later to farm. Rhodes had only dealt with the Matabele as they were the tribe that held sway over all the other tribes in the country, particularly the Mashona, who were subjugated and confined to the eastern part of the country between the Zambezi River in the north and the Limpopo River in the south, to be known as Southern Rhodesia. The Shona had themselves invaded the country from the north in the 1600s and ejected the Bushmen. The Matabele were an offshoot of the Zulu nation in South Africa and occupied themselves raising huge herds of cattle and raiding the Shona to eliminate the men and abduct the women to provide brides for the men and the children to become junior warriors. The Shona were a nomadic tribe who never settled and developed one area, but planted their crops, and when the ground no longer supported their industry, moved on and planted elsewhere. The Matabele raids kept the numbers down to a rough guess of around 200,000. It was to keep the Matabele from raiding and interfering with the settlers' farming and mining operations that the pioneers were tasked with policing both tribes and keeping them separated. This they succeeded in doing, and at the beginning of the 20th century set about forging a nation. In 1923 the settlers chose to become a self-governing colony rather than remain the domain of the British South Africa Company or a province of South Africa. Now these settlers were of mixed origins, mainly British, but also South African, and there were settlers from other mainly European countries, but all were identified as hard-working, family-orientated and loyal to the government of the day. The Africans were not overlooked either. They were offered the same standards to conform to if they wished to adopt the whites' way of living. If not, areas of the country were set aside as tribal trust lands where whites were forbidden to interfere with their tribal way of living. The white Southern Rhodesians were adventurers, explorers, and dedicated hard workers. The sins of the welfare state were never part of the Rhodesian makeup, which is why, on the breakup of the country, Rhodesians were preferred throughout the world for their affinity for hard work, loyalty, and honesty. The sons and daughters of those pioneers and their children were proud of their families, proud of their education and sportsmanship, proud of their heritage, and proud of their country. They were joined by those who migrated from elsewhere, but after a period of settling in, changed their status and became Southern Rhodesians. I was one of them, and 29 years after settling in the country became Zimbabwe. I am not a Zimbabwean and am proud to remain a Rhodesian. In September 2014, I was in a gift shop in Logan City, Queensland, looking around for items to get for our 60th wedding anniversary, which was in January this year. In the course of conversation, the lady assistant was surprised that I was doing this so early. I said it was a quality exercise by Rhodesians and quoted as an example the fact that Alan Hadfield had already commenced preparation for this occasion. She was mystified by the unknown word in her vocabulary, Rhodesians. She only recognised Zimbabwe. Well, we are here today to remember that some 50 years ago our political leaders had had a gutful of broken promises by the British government, which after all had been gifted the country by Cecil Rhodes, and taking a leaf from the USA had declared its independence. I was the detective inspector in charge of the CID Special Branch Station at Sinoia, which covered the Lomagundi district, with my western boundary at Bumi, my northern boundary the lake and the Zambezi River, my eastern boundary Kanyemba, and my southern boundary the 22-mile peg outside Salisbury on the Lomagundi Road. I controlled 2 road crossings into Zambia at Kariva and Chirundu. On the 10th of November 1965, I was summoned to Salisbury by the District Criminal Investigation Officer, Chief Superintendent Peter Allen, where I met my colleague and friend Detective Inspector Mike Amara, who was in charge of CIDSB at Marandellas. We were told of the order of events to take place on the following day, and that my border control members were to monitor the crossing points as the borders would be closed. The 11th of November dawned. The uniformed police were out in the town, but there was hardly any traffic. At 1 p.m, the Prime Minister, Ian Douglas Smith, addressed the nation. In summarising the events and discussions with the British government, Smith made it plain that he and his government were at loggerheads with the British government over the breaking of that government's promises of independence, whereby it and other European governments gave independence to countries which had only governed themselves for as little as a year, but denied independence to southern Rhodesia, which had governed itself since 1923. He went on to stress the protection of civil rights for all the people, especially the blacks. His address was followed by the official announcement of the Unilateral Declaration of Independence, UDI. After the address, the town erupted into excited discussions on the one hand and confusion and dismay on the other. The Rhodesian Front members arranged an impromptu party at the Sinoia Country Club, and the local dance band of men from the post office kicked off proceedings, and many were the toast being sung and drunk that night. Members of the police had been instructed to remain at their posts until the dust had settled. But there were mixed feelings amongst those who had migrated from Britain. After all, the Queen Mother was our honorary commissioner, a charming lady who had had a chat to me in 1953 when she travelled by road from Umtali to Fort Victoria, and again in 1989 at the centenary dinner in London. There were hardly any resignations from the force over UDI. We had been given a job to do by the government, who paid us, and our loyalty was to the people and government of the country, not the government of the United Kingdom. I stayed and played my part in the civil unrest that followed. The British were not amused. The Americans won their independence, but we didn't. However, in the 15 years from 65, a bond was forged which lasts today, and all over the world we remember the fallen. We remember each other and are proud to call ourselves Rhodesians. I won't bore you now with the reactions of the British and American governments, their military chiefs, or the United Nations and the nationalist movements. Suffice to say that we took them on, thwarted their plans, and never lost the war. We only lost the peace. I was proud of my fellow Rhodesians, and am today reminded of the fickleness of the world. which mourned the shooting down of MH17 in the Ukraine, but greeted the shooting down of the two Viscounts by CTs with a deafening silence. We built a wonderful country in Africa, provided our people with high standards of education, medical facilities, transport infrastructure, and a sound economy. Ellen Smith's political creed was emancipation by meritocracy, and he has been proved right. The country has gone from the basket of Africa, with its economy in the black, to a pariah state. Zimbabwe has an economy in the red, run by a megalomaniac and his coterie of thieves who have plundered and stolen its assets with no thought for the welfare of its people. The white farmers have been murdered and tossed out of the country. So too have its blacks, be they Matabele or the MDC. Millions of the black middle class have left the country to seek their fortune elsewhere. We even see them in Australia. That is the best that bunch of criminals can manage in 35 years. Now, I retired in March 1980, but had to serve 3 months' notice, dodging the incoming black minister and his staff as CIO. I was the last Rhodesian president of the Athletic Union, a serving member of the Rhodesian Hockey Board, the founder of the Rhodesian Track and Field Coaches Association. I had commanded the protection unit for the Prime Minister and become the Security Forces spokesman on radio and television for Combined Operations Headquarters. We have 4 Rhodesian children. The eldest married a policeman but was widowed in 1978 while she was 3 months pregnant. She married another Rhodesian in 1980. Our second daughter married a Rhodesian and later farmed at Karoi until they were thrown off their farm in 2002 without compensation by Mugabe thugs. Our eldest son joined me in the police, and our youngest served in the army and trained for the SAS. I am unashamedly Rhodesian, and today am the administrator of the Queensland branch of the BSA Police Regimental Association. I salute you all and ask you to stand for the Rhodesian National Anthem. I've been attacked by a bloody marsh fly.